So we now need to take a deeper dive into the actual production process. Once we look more closely at that, we will then be able to think about costs and how you choose what kind of production you want to do, right? How you're going to produce the output. So we're going to start with the short run, and I will end up explaining the long run later, right? And to make our life easy, I'm just going to say, look, we'll work with one input. When you go to more advanced classes, you can work with multiple inputs, but the sort of some of the ideas will be essentially the same. This is kind of like, in order to understand utility, we did for a while work with just a single good, and then we said, okay, now what if there were two goods, right? And you have to choose between them. So a firm has similar decision to make, for example, what if I want to enter this market or that market, move it, and that is going to show up as firms moving in and out of particular markets. Let's work with one good for now. And this good is going to be labor, because that turns out to be the most important element of variable costs in many, many cases. It's not the only important element of variable costs, right, as we'll come to in a moment, but it's pretty important input. There are other inputs that also matter, such as minerals. You've got mining, so you need sources of minerals, you need aluminum, you need iron, right? So there's all kinds of things that you have to work with. You need oil, but labor, right? Let's continue with the example of apples. And so I'm going to look at the quantity of apples depends on how much labor I'm using. This is not a demand and supply curve. Remember this. This is very important. This is not a supply and demand curve. That is the only curve in which those axes are flipped, where the independent variable goes on the y-axis. That's the only one. So for this one, we're going to put labor. So we're going to put a quantity of input down here. And we're going to put our total output over there, right? So I'm going to start with 1 worker, 2 workers, 3 workers, 4 workers, 5 workers, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 workers. Right. Here we go. Huh? So obviously, if I don't have any workers, I'm not producing anything. Right? No inputs, no output. Understand? And with the first worker, I say, the first worker gave me 2 apples. Now I added a second worker. And if it was constant relationship between input and output, or constant productivity, and I would say each worker gives me 2 apples, which is examples we've used before, you would just get a straight line. But in the real world, productivity is not constant. Go back and remember the PPF, where I said in the real world, what you usually see is decreasing productivity, increasing opportunity cost. Now you're going to see why. So initially, when I start hiring workers, I'm going to start with the most skilled workers. They're the first ones I'm going to bring in, right? Assuming the wage is constant, everybody's paid the same wage. I'm going to start by hiring, like I do an interview, and I will hire the most skilled worker, the person who knows most about harvesting, whatever. So I've got 1 worker. Now when the second worker comes, instead of 4, let us say they produce 2 into 4, let's say they produce 6, right? And this is because with two workers, you can have a division of labor. If you got one worker, that worker is by themselves, first gathering the apples, putting them in a basket, going down the ladder, coming back, right? But if you had two workers, you could divide that labor. You could have one person down, receiving the harvest. You could have one person on the tree doing the harvest, you know. You could have one person sort of doing the sorting if you have a third worker, right? So what that means is initially, you get each extra worker is actually adding more apples. The marginal productivity is actually higher in the initial stages. So if we went to 6, let's say we even went with the third apple, we went to 12 with the third worker, all right? So you can see that the initial shape over here is like this. Each extra worker is adding more output than earlier, and it's non-linear. So this is, you know, an initial phase like this. But eventually, you're going to hire more workers. You're going to be having less skilled workers. You've already taken all the skilled ones. You also will have the workers getting in each other's way. There is a limited capacity of how many trees you've got, and you've got too many workers running around. Some people don't know, you know, like they're not all as skilled. One person trips over the other person's basket, you know. So what happens is eventually you're moving to less and less skilled workers. So the third worker came here, the fourth worker maybe gave us 16, and then the fifth worker gave us 17. Sixth worker, maybe 18. By the time you get, so by the time you're coming out here, each worker is not adding as much. Right? So this idea of how production works is based on a concept of how productivity works. Right? So this reflects, this S shape reflects what we are going to call, maybe in the initial phases, your opportunity cost of what else you could get was not very high because your workers are highly productive. As you go further out into hiring workers, more and more workers, then the extra productivity is not that strong. So this S-shaped curved reflects this. The law of diminishing marginal productivity. Right? You've come across this when we saw the PPF and we said there was a law of increasing opportunity costs, right? More and more of a product you start producing, then the cost of it in terms of the use of the resources becomes higher and higher. And that's because the more and more you're producing and you're using workers here, you're beginning to draw in the less productive workers. And you're actually getting in each other's way, and you're not getting the benefits of division of labor anymore. And so S-shape, right? This is one of the most important elements of production decisions. And this is why firms don't just keep on producing more and more and more and more. Diminishing marginal productivity. It doesn't make sense to keep on because of this, right? So we're going to have to figure out how to convert this into questions of costs. But before that, I want to show you something very interesting, because just as we looked on the revenue side and we looked at total revenue, then we looked at average revenue and we looked at marginal revenue, I'm going to want to look at total, and then I want to look at average, and I want to look at marginal. I'm not yet at costs, remember, because I haven't added in the sort of actual cost, the price of the product of the workers as yet. nor have I figured out which combination to use or how much labor to use based on what the market prices are. So there's a bunch of work I still have to do, but let's just do some work now since we've got productivity, using this idea to figure out something about average productivity and marginal productivity. All right?